It's great to be here. Tell me about, in brief, your organization, and I will try and give you as spot on a talk as ever possible.
Thank you, and thank you so much for joining us. We're really excited to speak to you. So our organization is called the European Debate Initiative. Of course, much smaller scale than the European movement, but a bit of the same ideals. But yeah, we invite different guests, such as you, to speak on European affairs and just matters that we think are important. So thank you so much for joining us. But maybe we should start with a brief introduction of you, and you can add to or tell me if I'm wrong with my small introduction. But so you have since 2015 been the chairman of the European movement in Denmark, and you are also a very successful businesswoman. You're chairing different boards in companies such as the Allianz Group and many others, and you're involved with the European Council of Foreign Relations and so many other interesting things. And also a fun fact, in 2010, the UN Secretary appointed you as the advocate for the Millennium Development Goals. That's right. And you've also been nominated twice for being like one of the most influential businesswomen in the world by Forbes. So that's all very impressive. But so you have all these different perspectives from business, from the different boards that you chair, and also just as a citizen of Denmark, of course. But then I want to ask you, why then Europe? Why is Europe then so important to you? Why and is the future of Europe in a way linked to that of the EU?
Yeah.
And what difference would it make if more countries would follow the UK to leave the EU actually? So why, in a way, like, why is Europe important to you?
Okay. Thank you very much, and thank you for your introduction. And it, for me, it is pretty personal, and it's also pretty logical. On the personal side, I'm half British. My mother was born and bred in Great Britain. Came to Denmark when she was 19, married my dad, and so on from there. So I was always brought up much more, I can see that much clearer now than ever, as a European. For me, it was like, there is this umbrella, and that really made a lot of difference. This was also why when the referendum was decided in UK, I felt very bad, because I had this sense that they were going to leave, because I was always listening to very nationalistic blah 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 from my uncles. I'm not saying that all people in UK are like that, but there was always this, we're only half in. We are always like, the people on the continent, they are a bit different. We are very special. And it doesn't work like that for me. For me, to be European is part of my identity. The logical side of this for me is that if you look at all the big agenda points, that for you guys, I mean, I'm 60, so okay, I could say, well, it's been fun and I'll just enjoy the rest of my life. But for you guys, you are somewhere in between my children and my grandchildren, age-wise. I just pick up my dog so that she doesn't make a lot of noise. Sorry. Very loving dog. So you guys, you will be faced with all the greatest huge challenges, like climate change, like plastic, like other environmental issues, like safety in a different level that we've been used to, like pandemic situations, like migration, cyber, big tech. How do we handle tax situations? All these issues cannot, in my opinion, be solved country by country. To some extent, yes, because things need to happen also on a country level. But the big picture, we need to get that right. And knowing that we are a decreasing population in Europe, and it's fast. It's not like it's going to be in 100 years. No. It's right now, it's happening. You will need people to come to Europe. So we need to think about ourselves in that way. And all these huge things need collaboration, or if we don't get this right, we will have to look either to China or to the US. And to be honest, I don't prefer any from the other. I would like now to prefer US because that, you know, Biden is a good guy. But what happens after that? We just saw what can happen. But where in Europe we know our values, we know that we believe in democracy, we know that we believe in equal rights between male and female, minority protection, and rule of law, all these things. It's in Article 2. For me, Article 2 is extremely important. So this is, of course, also where, back to your question, will there be more people leaving the European Union? I think no. But what I do think is a big challenge is that there are big groups of people within our union who are not strong believers of human rights, who are not strong believers of rule of law. And you can even see in a country like my own, like in Denmark, even some of those issues are threatened, even by a social democratic government. You would not believe it. So we need to work also with an awareness within the union for about what are our values, what is it that really is at stake in these years, not only pointing fingers at, hold up, stop it, not only pointing fingers at the newcomers in Eastern Europe, but also within our own countries, saying, you know, is everything here quite okay? Or do we need to really sort of reshape ourselves? So for me, that's a very, very important part of the whole debate. And as I was debating the other day with some people, if Article 2 was removed, and there would be forces who would think this is a great idea, if Article 2 was removed, I would not be a pro-European with that construction. For me, the basic for really being so much pro the EU project and seeing it as a great protection for all citizens is the values that we build upon. And then, of course, comes the finances and the trade and the safety positions and all this. But if it is without these values, if it was suddenly, you know, erased, and then it could be, you know, totalitarian or whatever, then it wouldn't be my cup of tea.
Yeah, so in a way, the European project is also a project of values, as you rightly say, and those values are, of course, inspired by the member states that are participating in the Europe and that are members of the European Union. But in the end, it's also up to both the member states and the EU as the institutions to protect these via Article 2. And we've seen these challenges with the rule of law crisis and so on.
Yes.
But so you emphasized this maybe national perspective of it's important to look within the country maybe first. So let's maybe move to that perspective. Because we would like to a bit ask you about in general, the Danish debate on the EU has been up and down, both now and in the past. And membership of the EU is still a contested issue. Maybe not what's debated every day, but it's still contested. And so in 1972, Denmark became a member of the EU with a majority of 63%. And then there's these opt-outs because then in 1992, the Maastricht Treaty was rejected by referendum. And then we got these opt-outs in Denmark, these 4 different opt-outs that, for example, are the currency. So we have our own currency. We don't have the euro. And the same counts for home and justice affairs, and also some of the security policy of the EU. Sure. But so, for example, if we focus on these opt-outs for a bit, do you see that there is any chance for these being abolished anytime soon? Because it is a bit of they have a long history, and they were created a long time ago. So hasn't the debate changed today, would you say? Is there like a revival there?
Yeah. I would say that you can't take, I mean, there's, let me put it, my view, and then there's the sort of sentiment within Denmark. In my opinion, all the opt-outs should be gone. Again, because I really think we're a small population. We are close to 6 million people, but that is small. We're strong financially, but we do not have any chance. If there was any big threat against us, military-wise, for example, we have an exemption on defense. Yes, we have NATO, and I believe, I'm a strong believer that NATO is crucial for all Europe. But I mean, for me, it is illogical, and it is slightly crazy that we don't have, that we don't work closer together with our neighbors. And I think also, if you look at what was before Biden, I won't mention the name, what was before Biden, I mean, a lot of question marks about, NATO and how is NATO really going to act in different situations. We need to get our act together in Europe. And I was much more of a pacifist if I look back. Now I'm much more realistic. We need to have a strong defense position also within, because otherwise we can be left in a mess that we don't want to be in. So that's the one, that's my position. If you then take it to the country, I could find, say, half of the political parties who would probably say, okay, it's a good idea to begin debating this, but it's not for the government. They don't want to have anything to do with it. They are, I won't say that they are EU critical, but they are like, it doesn't really matter. It's only, sometimes at dinner time we can talk a bit about it, but otherwise it's like, it's not really something to do with us, which is a horrible position. I much more prefer those who say, we want out, because then we can have a debate, a qualified debate. The ones that are sort of, blurry, that's bad. Then if you take some of the other, the euro, the currency, it's crazy that we're not part of the euro, because our currency is completely connected to the euro. So the krone and the euro is sort of like floating like this. So we have, everything is like in euro, it's just called krone. And we don't have any say. We're not in the room when currency issues are debated. Crazy. So I would also say, let's get that done. If you ask that question in Denmark, nobody would go down that road right now. It's just not, there's no push at all. There's no sense of urgency. And then we have the one on the justice issues. We had a referendum not long ago. People were like, they didn't really understand it. The ones that were pro getting rid of it were not really paying attention. The politicians were not looking after their positions. So the no side just took over and talked all about giving up sovereignty, which is a crazy debate, because we don't have any sovereignty at the end of the day. It's just something that we talk about as if, you have the elephant and the mouse walking across the bridge, and the mouse goes, listen how we are really making a noise now, which is, it's crazy. It's nothing to do with reality. It's emotional more than anything. So I think for all these areas, especially the defense one, that will come within the next, my guess would be 5 years. We will start debating it, and it will hopefully go away, because it's just illogical.
So if in a way the question of the EU in the public debate is more of a question of perception rather than the actual influence, because as relating to what you said, like I think something like 60% of the Danish legislation comes from the EU. It's just implementing EU like regulations, directives, all these things.
Yes.
And as you say, the euro follows, or the kroner follows the euro, and so on.
Yeah.
So this whole sovereignty debate, is it then more just a question of perception, how it's maybe phrased in the public debate? Because if it is just a question of feelings almost,
Yes.
then how do you turn this away from being something that can be used by, I don't know, like right-wing parties to some feeling narrative rather than something more concrete and what we can actually do through the EU with, for example, security and military policy?
Yeah, I think you have to get politicians who are pro-European, who wants to get away with the exemptions, and who will actually use slightly populistic methods. It's sometimes I get very annoyed with my fellow people that think like me, and I say, why are you always so nice? Why are you always so factual? Why are you always only talking about, this is the way and this is how it is? Why are you not playing on emotions? Because the other guys are all the time. They're talking about, that we have to give up sovereignty. You have to confront them with, what is that sovereignty? What is the sovereignty for a country like Denmark when we talk about defense? It's zero. It's nothing. So you have to show people also that this is an emotional issue at the end of the day, but also of course then pay attention to that you don't say something that is factually wrong, but you use also emotions to really feel something for this project. This is for me sometimes in Denmark, for example, it's been all about the price of bacon. So like this is how it started, sort of thing, where who cares about the price of bacon at the end of the day? But if somebody came and said, now you can forget everything about human rights, you can forget everything about equality between male and female, it's not in our constitution anymore because it's just out of the window. Then people start waking up and say, probably that's not a good idea. And if even educated audiences in Denmark, if I say to them, do you know this Article 2? Do you actually know the basic values? And then they start talking about, a Danish author called Grundtvig, and they say, oh, this is very important. And then if I say to them, okay, fine, I buy that, but what came after Grundtvig? After freedom of speech? Where do we have freedom of speech? Where does it say freedom of speech? Yes, in our constitution to some extent, but it actually is in our Article 2. That's where it's legally binding. And for me, it's not difficult to be emotional about these things. And I think we're too little emotional in my country, because I do think it is threatened, unfortunately.
Yeah, that's maybe also a culture thing, this emotional stance.
Yeah.
But let's stay on the line of what so from the national perspective, if we move a bit to the European movement and its role in, for example, this public debate on whether it being on facts or emotions or a mix, I'll give the floor over to you, Francesca.
Yes, just to add on what you just said, the importance of how we define and talk about Europe. You are part of the European movement in Denmark since 2015. So this is, we mentioned this before with Thomas, it's a movement that was founded after the Second World War. And today that tries to inform the debate about Europe. Saying that the European movement was a major player in the past because it suggested institutions like the Council of Europe or the European Convention of Human Rights. Would you say, this is a major achievement for an NGO to suggest these things, which still stand today after almost 70 years? And do you feel that today something similar might be needed with
Yes.
the challenges that we have, such as the rule of law, post-Brexit, yes, etc.?
Francesca, without any doubt. And sometimes I look at myself as being part of a sort of resistance movement, saying, you know, we've got to protest. There are things here that we do not want to lose. And it's very difficult. That's a difficult position. Whereas after the World War II, there was a very obvious thing. And there was a much more sort of, we are fighting to get this. Now we are fighting to keeping it. And people don't understand the depth of what we actually have in this part of the world. This is, for me, devastating. Sometimes to an extent that I just have to turn off the radio or not read newspapers for a while just to calm myself. But that's just to say that I really think we are in a situation, and that's why I really think it's good that you young people, you're the ones that we are building upon. You're the ones that have to say to my generation, come on, you're not giving up on issues that your parents fought for. I mean, my mother's family blood was shed. So you're not giving up on that just to have an easy ride. We want this. We want this to stay in place. And that has to be a fight, unfortunately, because the other much more nationalistic, much more nationalistic, much more inwards looking. It is grabbing people, and of course the corona situation hasn't made it easier, because a lot of people, for good reasons, look to their head of state and say, you know, how do we handle this? Some have done well, some have done less well, but at the end of the day, suddenly the national understanding and borders and controls and all this becomes very practical, and to some extent you also have to say helpful. But we need to understand that making sure that we don't go back down that road, we need to understand all the benefits that we are actually living with as a community.
Yes, I mean, as you mentioned, my generation and our generation will have to continue preserving what we fought for in the past, and
Yeah.
I mean, not take it for granted what we have in Europe. And so, I mean, adding to this, what can you give us maybe a concrete example of how the European movement in Denmark tries to address these issues, and what you do concretely?
I mean, we are probably regarded as by politicians as a very activistic NGO, not necessarily as an organization, because we are organized with local groups and boards and all this, but our statements are often very activistic. Some people like it, some people don't like it. I think it's very necessary. And especially because it is sort of drawing the picture of the alternative to the ones that want to push us in a much more right-wing direction, in a much more nationalistic direction, not friendly to foreigners and all this. And if I listen to the feedback that we got up towards the votes for the parliament, the last round, we were regarded as pretty instrumental to the fact that people actually voted, that there were actually active debates going on. And you know, the way we did that was that we started 2 years before, and we invited potential members of parliament to join, and we called the debates We Are Europe. And you know, because people forget that. People always say down in Europe or down in Brussels. And I mean, we are Europe. So that was sort of the frame of the debate. And then we made it very easy for the people participating, because we went to one town a day. And then we went to the school in the morning. We went in the streets midday, you know, talking to people in the streets. We went to the library in the afternoon, and we went to the town hall in the evening. So we offered, as a debating institution, we offered the participants that they would meet. I think we said minimum 400 people in one day. And that's a lot for a parliamentarian. So we designed the debate in a way that they would like it, rather than say, you know, we're coming this evening 2 hours in a small town in some desolate area. Nobody came. But in this model, we really activated the muscle of debating.
That means that you manage to combine politics with civil society and the citizens,
Yes.
that you bring them together.
Yes.
What would you say was then the most successful project that you worked on in the last years?
No, I think that was definitely the one. And we were very specific that we wanted people who were politically disagreeing, but agreeing on Europe as the European Union, as not questioning that. Because as soon as we let the people in the door that questions that, then that becomes the debate. You know, a yes or no debate is much easier. People say, well, we didn't get any wiser, but it was all, you know, are we going to stay, are we going to leave? So we wanted to cut that away and have a real political debate about the social pillar, about agriculture politics, and all these real issues. And this was what really people loved about it, that it was not abstract. It was very concrete. It was like, how are we going to solve these environmental issues? What are your suggestions, Social Democrat, NN? So it was very, how can I say it, down to earth, practical, and yet again, it was very European, and people like that.
Yeah, I think that's probably the challenge, showing citizens and people that the EU is not abstract thing in Brussels, but that
Yes.
it concerns and is actually concerning our daily lives and
Yeah.
the decisions we take.
Can I make a bit of a marketing stunt here just before we get to the closing? I wanted to tell you that as we speak, we are creating a festival of Europe, where we invite all Europeans. We understand that it might be a lot of Danes there, but we will be marketing this also in the rest of Europe, to make sure that we hope about 10-20,000 people will come together in Denmark, in a town called Mariager, in 22 in August, to debate, to do exactly this that I was just talking about. How are we going to solve this migration issue? Why can't we get our grip around the whole agriculture thing? Why are we still spending a lot of money in that area? Could we do that differently? And what would it take? And so on and so forth. All these real subjects. And then, of course, also enjoying a cold beer and some music and some different European foods, to try and showcase that at the end of the day, we might word it a bit differently, but the dreams of a European, young people like yourself, are very much the same. It's about education, it's about security, it's about, you know, good life, it's about having a good maternity model where, you know, you share male and female. How would you all these issues? And I hope very much that you will take this as an invitation, and that you will spread the good news that something interesting is going to happen in August 22 in Jutland. So you can drive to the place, you don't have to sail. It's connected directly with Europe.
Yeah, thank you. We will promote this.
That's good. Thank you so much.
Yeah, and then on this note, I'd like to go back to the topic of communication. So how do we actually communicate about Europe, inform citizens about the EU, and what is identity? So I'll give the floor back to Zoe.
Yes, so we want to talk about how and why communication about the EU and the European project is important. Because for most citizens, you hear about the EU through the news. You kind of hear of, oh, now there's this new this new agreement on migration, or a strategy for the vaccine, or something else. But it's still a bit vague, and there's not maybe a coherent understanding of the EU as a whole, and the bigger aims and the bigger strategies. And so in a way, we want to address what is it that the EU can do better than the member states individually. Yeah. So how would you explain this to a citizen that doesn't necessarily see the EU as just the natural kind of response to the sovereign state? Or how would you
actually the pandemic situation from the starting point, and now I'm not talking about vaccines, I'm talking about handling the pandemic from the starting point. How could we oversee for so many years that we actually needed to think about this together? Well, a lot of people were saying to us, this is a big risk. You actually need to get your act together. So what did the EU system do? They had a little agency up in Stockholm who were monitoring this very carefully. 2 weeks before Denmark was closed down, and that was about the same time, all countries were like within plus minus to 1 to 2 weeks. So 2 weeks before that, this agency called for heads of states, foreign ministers, health ministers, and the press to come and listen, because they wanted to tell them something very important that they had to, think about. Nobody came. Zero. Nobody. This is for me an example of, how not to do it. Then if I have also used the same situation to say, then what happened, which is actually slightly a miracle, because then suddenly, out of the blue, the Commission took charge. They made mistakes. I'll come back to that. But they took charge. And they said, we don't have any mandate on any health issues. It's not part of the treaty. It's not part of anything. But are you not agreeing, heads of states? Shouldn't we do this together? And of course, everybody said yes. Knowing well what we see today, that if, for small countries like my own, if we had not acted together, you would have a big Germany, a big France, quite a big Spain and Italy, and then you have sort of bits and pieces having to deal with this on their own. It would have been much more expensive, probably not really even doable, and you will have left countries like Greece, like Croatia, whatever, many countries also on the fringe, you would have left them completely out. So people fortunately came together and said, yes, we will do this together. And then, in my opinion, I just read an article, and I was always very much in favor on how this was done. And I know it has an up and a downside. But if you see what has been done, looking after, not using the protectionism like US and UK have done, we didn't do that. You can say it was naive. Okay, I buy that argument. But on the other hand, we were sticking to our values. We were saying we're not going to let the rest of the world down. We're not going to only have our own vaccines. We're going to try and let the market play a role. Probably somewhere in between is the wisest, if to be honest. But at the end of the day, I would say, it did work a lot better working together than if we had left the countries one by one. And you can just look at the rest of the world. Think about what had happened in Europe if we hadn't acted together. Look at the rest of the world. Look at what's happening in India. Think about if that had been some country in Europe with no money or less money, less influence, less capabilities in making contracts and so on. It was a big achievement that the EU actually came together on such a very, very difficult subject with no mandate. So if we build upon that and say, okay, then we can do this better. then we can actually think about how we're going to do this in the future. That's how we're going to go forward about it, in my opinion. And there are two levels here of communication. One is von der Leyen. Now, the chairman of the commission has been in Danish TV about 10 times as often as ever before. I mean, now people know who von der Leyen is, with or without a chair. I'll come back to that. But the fact is, now people know that this person is there and that she's actively doing something for the citizens. She's not doing it for big firms or for whatever. She's doing it for you and me as citizens. That's a very, very big achievement, in my opinion. And I would say to the Commission, stay on that note. Make sure that people that you're communicating, not via big institutions and via national politicians, but you're communicating about real things to real people in all countries. So that's one level sort of communication. The next level is, of course, the national level. That's actually slightly more tricky. So the national level of politicians do not really always appreciate that the Commission, just some years back, it was unthinkable that they would have a direct communication. Now it is possible. So they don't necessarily like this, because it shows you and me and everybody else that the national politicians have some power, but not every power. How is it to be a very powerful head of state who goes out and tells the citizens, you know what, I think this is a brilliant idea, I'm going to do this, but I just have to go and agree with 26 or 27 other heads of states. That's really a difficult position, but we have to teach them this. We have to make them understand that that's how they become trustworthy. We can only trust them if they tell us the truth, and this is the truth. Some things we can decide for ourselves, but on the big agendas, we need to, it's something we do together. I think this is improving in Denmark, at least, that there is a bit more common understanding and a bit more truthfulness in the way things are communicated, but it can be a lot better. And of course, the one thing that should never happen is the blame game, which you are very aware of, that everything that is positive, it's me, it was my idea, it's something that we did in the local parliament, and every time it's something which is difficult, that the citizens might not like, then it's them. It's these terrible people in Brussels. They're always a nuisance. This is what happened in the UK. For 20 years, that was the game that was going on. And of course, people in the street that don't read newspapers, two or more a day, they would think, okay, but why are we a member of this club? They are always doing silly things, and they're never doing anything in our benefit. And it was always wrong, but they got away with it.
Yeah, so the media actually plays a huge and really crucial role in how the EU and its communication is perceived among its citizens, no matter what their allegiance is.
The media, but it starts with the politicians, Zoe. It is actually, no media can bring something that a politician didn't say, So it starts with the politician being truthful and being, how can I say it, loyal, of course, being truthful and being loyal to the structure that we have created together.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, in a way, like the communication is one thing, like coming from the EU, and then how the media perceives it is something else, and then there's this whole rhetoric of feelings versus facts and how it is combined. So it's a mix of things that's probably also hard to conclude, like why EU communication is maybe not as effective as it could be. But you mentioned, for example, the foreign policy which is quite difficult in the EU, because like, what is EU foreign policy? Because there are so many differences between the member states. So how can you speak with one voice, as it's often said, in an area such as, foreign policy?
Yeah. For me, it is at the end of the day, I like to make things simple, because then you can always make them more complicated afterwards. But for me, it's pretty simple. So when we send out our foreign minister, for example, to, or you could say, let's take the meeting with the chair, with Charles Michel and von der Leyen. Now, that really showed us, and hopefully that was the once and for all and never again, that really showed us that if we do not stick together as European institutions, this was the Commission versus the Council. This was the Commission versus the Council. So be it the institutions or be it the countries, if we do not stick together and work together, who gets the benefit? Who can be the one that's, it would always be I won't call him the enemy, but it would always be the non-European part. And does that do us any good, any of us? No, of course not. We want to be strong versus Erdogan. We want to be strong versus Putin. We want to be strong and together versus the countries of the Middle East. Not necessarily as enemies, could easily be as friends. But if we do not stick together, we cannot demand anything. We cannot say to Erdogan, we have equal rights between male and female, so go and get a chair. What a statement that would have been. Of course, he should never have sat down. He should just have looked at him and said, we're two people here. And even the scandal would have done us good. Now the opposite perhaps did us good. And we will have to work on that going forward.
And actually what's interesting about that Sofagate, as it's termed, is that the Ursula von der Leyen, then she recently after this held a speech in the European Parliament, and this speech was by various media, at least in Denmark, kind of praised as a new way of communicating.
Yes.
It has this approach of being very personal and appealing to people's feelings. And so the commentators at least mentioned that maybe this was a new way forward to communicate, because it's maybe more captivating also. And so
this is exactly back to our starting point. She was emotional because she was pissed, and we should be that with her, be us male or female. This is not the way that we go forward in the times we're living. So I think that is exactly what we need. We need these people to be emotional about our values and where we stem from.
Yeah, definitely. It's a difficult issue, because when we discussed this topic about communication, it was difficult to kind of phrase like what is the communication coming from the EU, and how can it be done better, because it's in a way it's not like a precise concept that you can see this is the communication strategy of the EU, but it also goes together, communication together with this notion of identity, and European identity that we also have touched upon already. But it's kind of it's both something with values, but also something with geography. But I don't know, Fanny, if you want to go in more into it.
Yes, because I mean, in the EU we have many countries from Europe, and so we have cultural links, but also linguistic links, common history, but also most of all the values on which the EU was actually founded back after the Second World War, when 6 states said, okay, we want to work together to avoid what happened in the past. And so now you mentioned Article 2, which is of course the founding article of the EU, saying that we respect human rights, the rule of law, equality. And I mean, building up on this, is there such a thing as a common European identity?
Yes, definitely, without any doubt. And if we probably, I don't know how many of you, but some of you will have traveled outside of Europe. And many people that have done so, including myself, when you touch down in a European country, you know you're back. Then you might feel more at home or whatever when you get back to your own country, and even more at home when you get back to the city or wherever you live. So it's sort of a step, but there is a common identity. And even though I think that's a big mistake that we don't have a common language, we speak English, but let's make it the language then, that everybody has to speak English, and then a second language. Could be your own or could be another language. So there's something there we need to think more about, I think. But at the end of the day, yes, there is an identity. If you look back, look at our theater tradition, look at our democracy tradition, all started in Greece, actually. See how that has been built upon, and see how every country, it's so funny, because I was chairing the Danish national scene, and that is music, it's opera, it's ballet, and it's theater, classical theater. And I was always like, there's only one of these arts who is really national. The rest is international. Ballet is international. Opera is international. And these art things, they stem from us. They might be performed all over the world, yes, but they stem from us. Look at the CE brand. How we are very, very prudent about what we accept for goods, for food, for everything. See the power in that. It's extremely powerful. This is why I'm personally very happy with what's happening now in the tech sector, where they're also thinking about, we need standards. We need to have again, we're on the sides of the citizen. We actually crave something, demand something from our suppliers. Yes, it's fantastic that we have big business and they can earn a lot of money, but we have to protect ourselves as customers. And that, of course, has a big, that resonates well. For example, look at China with the breast milk thing, it wasn't breast milk, it was artificial milk for babies. Big scandal. So everybody in China only wanted the product that came from EU. This is where we should really be proud and understand the deep values, also in a commercial way, but also looking after citizens' interests.
Yes, so I mean these are great examples of why the EU is good, and it didn't just create peace but also prosperity. And I mean, yes, also as a customer, we have huge benefits from this.
Yes.
And I mean, but then of course we always hear, or politicians mention that sometimes things are better done at a national level or local level. I mean, when is this the case according to you? When is it better to work on the EU, and when is it better to actually focus on the local community?
If I could design it all from the starting point, and don't quote me on this because it's not a popular statement, but if I could create it from a starting point, I would let big municipalities have much more power and skip the state. I'm not skipping the royal families, but I'm skipping the very big state thing. Because I think the closer you get to people, some things around, how we're going to organize our sewage situation, how we're going to organize our, supplies of different things, how we're going to organize rules around opening hours, and all this could be done happily in big municipalities. Some education issues, yes, but some education issues might be much more easily done if you think about, the way that we make marks and so on. So it's a delicate question, but I do think that more could be done with a much bigger mandate given to the common good. And then say again, of course, there will be parliaments. I don't think that that's going to go away. And they could deal with health issues, but some health issues need to be dealt with on a European level. And I just think that if we give the mandate, we should give it much more powerful. That's probably my clearest point. Yes.
So if we give a mandate, it should be fully,
Yes.
and also
Yes.
empower local
Yes.
municipalities,
Yes.
so that it's closer to citizens in the
Yeah.
end. Great. Well, then on this note, I'll give it back to Zoe, the floor, who will ask you something about business, since this is also a field where you've been quite active.
Yeah, so it's easy to say that you're an expert in many fields, including the business world. And if we take that to an EU or European perspective, then I mean the European Economic Community, as it was called in the beginning, was initially based on a common economic interest. And this was basically the coal and steel sector that was merged between 6 countries in the beginning, so France, Germany, the Benelux countries, and Italy, under this supranational authority. And the idea was, of course, bigger, so it was to create long-lasting peace, but was mainly economic interests. So to what extent would you say that the argument for Europe, or the argument for cooperation in Europe, is based on economic interests and the promise of economic prosperity, just basic as that?
But do you know what, Zoe? The reason for making the coal and steel union was not financial. It was because they wanted to make sure that they were not upgrading their military. It was to keep an eye on each other. And this is, for me, extremely important to understand the depth of that, because we are not peaceful people. We were the starting point of 2 world wars. And nobody is going to explain to me ever that that could not happen again. I just would never believe it. Look at the rhetoric between London and Brussels. And unfortunately, I'll have to say that I think London started it, being always this blame game. And we need to really understand that at the end of the day, yes, I'll come back to the business side of it, but at the end of the day, this is a peace project. Peace means prosperity. Prosperity stems from sound business, and sound business stems from a big market without any border issues, without any technical hindering. When I was a child, there were 17,000 different whatever units. So when you went to France, you have to have one set of things, and you always had to think about this. Now everything is much easier. Young people, this is very fortunate. We should make it stay like this. Don't have to worry about these silly things. It's one big market. It's one way of doing it. And of course we should go forward like this. And this is why we became rich. This is why we have welfare systems that actually can provide welfare. It's sort of that's the path of development. And for me, it is crucial to understand that also the design here, deep down, the design in Europe is about healthy business, strong social contracts. That means peace and order. That again means healthy businesses, because that's what healthy businesses needs. So you have a positive spiral. And there is a risk where we are right now that you could actually sort of disrupt that positive spiral, and that things sort of become very, very difficult because it goes the other way around. People become more, wanting to not necessarily fight, but argue with each other because people are left with problems. Look at the way that we are not at all debating enough how are we going to support Southern Europe just by tourism. I'm not talking about big finance or constructions and whatever. That's a good thing that happened. But how are we How are we going to make sure that we get the tourism going back in the Southern European countries? All these issues need to be much more in focus.
Yes. Also, I just want to mention, audience, you are welcome to ask questions. So just write them in the chat or raise your hand if you have any questions for Stine. But so going back to this business, or you could say economic perspective on Europe, would you say that, relating it back to our identity discussion, would you say that these two, so business and European identity, are these natural allies in a way?
Business and identity?
Yeah, or the like the economic and the prosperity issue or side of the European cooperation in the EU, and then the European identity, which is much broader and more based on values and these values of the rule of law, respect for human rights, and so on. Are these allies rather than two different topics that don't relate at all?
Definitely allies, and they do relate. And I would argue that if you look also in our thinking in Europe, it was always I have a very caring dog. It was always like, we're united in being different, united in the fact that we are not alike. And this is very, very helpful for business. People don't recognize that, but having worked within business, when you can actually go ned, just a second. When you can actually bring people together that are not alike, and they start debating and they start developing, that's where the creativity starts. That's where you actually get better at what you're doing. This is what you see in Apple, in Google, in some of the big techs. They were like, we're not looking at having exactly the same kind of people. We actually favor the fact that we're different. This is what creates a lot of energy. And this is what we've been very good at within Europe and the European Union, and within our companies, our businesses. We should use that as a positive and as a growing point, rather than this very nationalistic. We have to be exactly the same, religion, color, gender, No. The benefit of what we are dealing with here is that we are different. We have the same deep down the same dreams of what should life be like, but we come from different angles, and this is why we get better at what we're doing.
Yes, it's the whole approach of, what is it called, unity in differences, or
Yes.
something along those lines, that the EU is also kind of making a slogan out of. I think we're slowly reaching the end of our discussion, but we have some final questions for you. I'll give the floor over to Fanny again.
Yes, well, thank you already for all these great remarks and insights. And I mean, asking you maybe from a personal point of view, where would you see Europe in the next 5 years? And what do you think are the biggest challenges that maybe the next generation has to address? And how? I don't know.
Let me start on what I fear, and then I will end on the positive note. I fear this extreme right. And if you look at my own country, the Social Democrats have adapted the total agenda of extreme rights. So this is for me a very, very devastating situation. So that's on the fear. I fear that we don't get our finances working well enough, fast enough. I'm not sure that we can overview the full consequences of the pandemic. Some talk about this, it's like a hockey stick, it's just coming back up, but that's not true. It's much more like a K. There was a very interesting article in The Economist, where a lot of people go this way, but many more go that way. And that is not, it's just larger gaps, which will be threatening for stability. So That's on the fear side. That's probably enough. I could do more, but that's probably enough. On the positive side, as I said, I really think that, the fact that we came together quick, also on subjects that were not mandated, we acted together, we fixed the big financial package with also lending together for the first time ever, common European bonds. That's a very positive thing. For me, that is, connecting us more. We have to work together. There's, no other way. And then, of course, also knowing that all the big agendas, and if you go and ask Europeans in the street, they would now more than ever say, we might like, we might dislike, but we know that we cannot handle these big issues alone. Those three things, I think, are looking sort of positively ahead. And then, of course, we need clever politicians to have ambitions at the European level.
Yes, thanks a lot. For
like yourselves, hopefully.
Yeah, well, we're students. We're still studying. We come from Amsterdam, studying European studies, so interested in these topics, but of course aware of the challenges that are ahead. Yeah. Is there any advice you would give to people my age that are interested and care about these values and where we go in the future?
Just stick to them. Make sure that you get your inner compass completely set, and you will be challenged. You will be challenged continuously. Like people would say, well, what about our own people, and what about how do we handle our own situations? And then always stick to the fact that there really is, on the big issues, no own. It doesn't. It's a crazy idea. The world is completely different now than it was 40 years ago. 40 years ago, there was a lot of things that were handled on a sort of, we can deal with this on our own. The world was different. The way the world works today calls for us to work together. If you stick with that, and if you train yourself also in the argumentation around this, it's going to be okay.
Thanks a lot for this, and it was great talking to you. I think Zoe will close the session. It was, yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us, and everyone who listened as well. It was, yeah, we really got some good advice and perspectives on these European issues, identity and Brexit and the European movement. And yeah, so as a last thing, I would just like to announce that we also next week will be discussing digitalization with Karen Melchior, which is an ME.
Ah, great.
So if you or the audience members are interested, you should find that event on Facebook as well. So that's where we post our events. But thank you so much for joining us. It was really a great discussion.
Thank you, Francesca. Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me.